Welcome to Thrive Radio. I'm your host, Amy Montgomery, entrepreneur and founder of A Call to Thrive. I help businesses find the fastest path to make more money. Today, my guest is Duncan Brand. He's an executive coach, leadership consultant. He's the founder of Intrinsic Leader and author of Mind the Gap. Duncan helps organizations build people-first cultures by developing stronger leaders, creating healthier workplaces, and preparing businesses for the future of work in an AI-driven world. After decades of leading an organizational transformation, Duncan believes the greatest competitive advantage isn't technology, it's leadership. His work focuses on helping leaders strengthen what happens beneath the surface, purpose, values, emotional intelligence, and the ability to bring out the best in people. Today, we're talking about leadership, organizational culture, AI, emotional intelligence, coaching, and why the companies that thrive in the future will be the ones that put people first. Duncan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me, Amy. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So you spent years leading organizational transformation before launching Intrinsic Leader. What experiences led you to believe leadership needed a different approach?
Honestly, I was watching good strategies fail for reasons nobody really wanted to name. I'd sit in rooms where the plan was sound, numbers made sense, yet it still kind of fell apart. So every time I traced it back, it came down to people, whether they trusted each other, whether they felt safe speaking up, and whether the person at the top was actually leading or just managing. So after enough of these experiences, I stopped believing the problem was really strategy. The problem was almost always leadership, specifically what leaders were doing to the people around them without realizing it. And that's the work I wanted to do, not the org chart, but the humans inside of that org chart, if you will.
I like that. And you wrote a book, it's called Mind the Gap. What is the gap? And that leaders and organizations often fail to see.
Yeah, and first off, mind the gap it's an English phrase. Obviously, I'm from the UK, and it's what you see in train stations, and it's the gap between the platform and stepping into the train. And there's notices, and someone comes on a loudspeaker and says, mind the gap as you get onto the train. And so I was recently in the UK, and it sprang to mind that as I was doing this work, the gap is really the distance between what leaders say they value and what people actually experience day to day. Mm-hmm. So, for example, a company puts integrity and people first on the wall. Yeah, the way it promotes, rewards, and pressures people tells a completely different story. And everyone feels that gap, even when no one really talks about it. And so here's the thing. People don't leave because of the words on the wall. They leave because of the gap. So closing it's quiet and it's unglamorous work, but it's where trust either thrives, lives, or it dies, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you think especially when you're working in a large organization, it's so easy just to say, oh, well, that's the nice mission. And, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, we don't do that. Right. How many organizations, I don't know, I've been in my career that was definitely the truth. Or it was a phenomenal organization until, like you said, something happened where there was that break, right? Between that alignment. Yeah.
And that's the true test, is when something challenging happens, does the culture, can it stand up by itself? In other words, it's in the fabric of the organization. It's not words on walls or placards stating that employees are our most important asset. Yet we can't tell you the first thing about our people. But, the slogan on the wall, look, the people first. Yeah, right. Okay. But is that really true? People in their gut know. People aren't stupid. They can feel when an organization truly cares versus those that just look at them as a disposable asset.
Yeah. The first thing that came to mind was when I was at Deloitte, we used to run these workshops and we would talk about work-life balance, mm-hmm. and we'd be promoting it to, C-suite, mm-hmm. and everyone that was speaking at these events, 100% in the whole thing. But then you go back to your desk and it was, we don't do work-life balance. There's no such thing.
Exactly.
It's how many hours can you work?
Billable hours.
Mm-hmm. Billable hours. Yeah. So you're also close to publishing another book called Closing the Gap. Can you tell us a little bit more about that book?
Yeah, so Mind the gap was really about naming the problem and helping leaders see the distance between their intentions and their impact. So closing the gap is the how. It's the practical follow-up, if you will. So it's built on the idea that closing the gap isn't a program you launch. It's a set of habits leaders practice: how you listen, how you handle the hard conversations, how you make decisions when no one's watching. So less theory, if you will, more of what you actually do on a Tuesday afternoon when things are messy. So that's where culture is truly made. And I firmly believe that leaders drive the tone of a work culture, and that it's a responsibility that shouldn't be taken lightly.
Yeah, I like that. I like that practical application because, it's easy to go and do, a bunch of meetings and talk about what needs to change. But then when it comes down to practical application, that's a whole nother aspect,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So one of the things that stood out when we talked before the podcast was that you have a distinction between people first and employee centric, which you hear a
Yep.
lot. What is that difference? What is the difference between those two things?
Well, I think employee centric is often about keeping people comfortable. So perks and benefits, the free lunch, all the things you can put in a recruiting deck, basically, right? So it's not that it's bad, but it's very transactional. It treats people like a resource or an asset you're trying to keep happy enough to stay. People first is different. It's about treating someone as a whole human being, someone who has ambitions, a life outside of work, real potential that you're responsible for helping to unlock, basically. So one asks, how do we keep them? And the other asks, how do we help them grow, even if it means they'll eventually outgrow us?
Yeah.
That second question builds loyalty. The first one never will.
Yeah, I really like that. When I was a chief marketing officer, that's what I would do with my employees.
Mm-hmm.
I'd send them down. What do you want to do with your life? Do you have any clue where
Yeah.
you want to go from here? Let's dream a little bit, right?
Yeah, it's about the aspirational conversation because, isn't it true that as humans, we connect on emotions, and part of the emotion is what you aspire to be. And so if you don't have that conversation, you're not tapping into the whole person. You're just skimming the surface. And that's why people don't stay. And especially in today's day and age where it's pretty much, an open kind of issue that there is no loyalty either from employee or employer right now. Very few companies have managed to get their hands around, well, how do you treat people the right way?
Yeah.
And and they think it's about putting plaques on walls or giving more benefits and what have you. And that's not people first. That's just, it's putting lipstick on the pig, as they say, right? It's
Yeah.
it's masking what the true problems are.
Yeah. Yeah. And you start to find when you ask those questions, one, you start to get people to actually think about that because how many, it's easy just to go through life. And especially if it's the younger generation, it's difficult, because sometimes they're still trying to figure that out. But, it might just be as simple as, well, I would really at some point like to work in this other department, or I
Yep.
want to explore this other piece of work, or I want to do more of X, Y, and Z. And sometimes that's just adding one task to what they do every single month. It doesn't have to be earth shattering, massive career change, right? It just
Yeah.
is
Well,
leading them.
yeah. And one of the contradictions you see, Amy, to that point is the organization says, we promote people from within and it's all about your growth, your trajectory, blah, 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 blah. But then what happens is the reward structure kind of contradicts that, meaning that your manager is paid based on your performance. So if you're a really good performer and you create a nice bonus for them, are they going to let you move department? Probably not. But what if the reward was, if you develop someone, we'll reward you for that. Now the reward system mirrors what the company is saying. And this is that contradiction of reward versus what we actually do. And this is the underbelly of the culture, that it can be contradictory. And when it is, people, kind of are living this lie almost, and they, people figure it out and they're not going to stay for that. So yeah, it's a real issue. And interestingly enough, Amy, a study was just recently done by Harvard, And what they did is they put these 10 traits in a list, and they asked the selected people in their study to label them in order of importance. And so it was, customer service, employee centric. So it went on. Leadership was in there as well. And almost everybody got it wrong. And the number one thing that drives everything else was leadership, which, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense, right? Because leaders dictate the culture. They decide what strategy we're going to do, what projects we work at, all these things that affect everything else. So if that's broken, that piece, then everything downstream from that is as well, right? And this is why organizations, I don't think this is hard personally. I mean, the work is hard, but it's not hard to figure out root causes here. And that's part of what this work is about.
Yeah. So can you explain why you really believe it, why this matters now? And what do you feel what are some of the transformations that you've seen as you've gone out there and you've worked with teams? And what's the application that it ends up looking like in an organization?
Yeah, I think everyone today is talking about AI, right? And I think AI is going to take a lot of tasks off our plates. And that's exactly why leadership matters more, not less. Because when machines handle the heavy lifting, the analysis, the drafting, the sorting, all that kind of stuff, what's left for humans is the human part, right? Judgment, trust, meaning, and knowing when to push, when to hold back. You can't automate that piece, right? So the leaders who win won't be the ones who adopt the tools the fastest. It'll be the ones who use their free time that AI frees up for us to coach their people, to lead, to make sense of change, keep everyone focused on something worth doing. So my advice today is pretty simple. Let AI handle the tasks and reinvest that freed up time in your people. Don't just cut head count and call it efficiency. Because here's the thing, right? I think what AI is going to do is reveal the true underbelly of the organization. And I'll tell you what, when I finish this, Amy, you're going to know that it already has in some degree or another. So the true people-focused organizations, they're going to look at AI and say, I wonder how we can make our people more effective using AI as a tool. The employee-centric, or the ones that view their employees as disposable assets, are going to look at AI and say, I wonder who we can replace with AI. Massive difference, right, in philosophies.
Yeah.
But you're already seeing companies laying off with this. We see it in the Seattle area. Microsoft, Meta, Amazon are already laying people off, saying that AI is the future. We got to go to AI. They're building data farms here in Washington State to support that. But at some point, I think if you focus on AI, just the technology, you will plateau. Because at the end of the day, you need people to tell AI what you want it to do, and then also interpret what it gives you back in order to make decisions to move forwards, right? So the company invests in both are going to surpass the one that just focused on AI. So it may start off like this, but these guys will plateau, whereas these guys who focus on both will surpass over time this philosophy, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you think about it, AI is not innovative. It can only take stuff that's already been created and recreate, right?
Well, yeah, and to iterate and to use the tool effectively, you've got to have humans to understand, well, what is it we're trying to do with AI that's going to enable us to be more effective, more productive, more profitable, whatever it is, right? And so you can't really do that without human intervention.
Yeah.
I don't think, at least not yet, maybe in 50 years, 100 years, who knows? But, the reality is at the moment, we're in the infancy of AI. And so human intervention is probably more important now than it will be, further down the road. But I do honestly think that the people side of it has become even more important because, as we said before, AI doesn't have a beating heart. It doesn't have emotions. It doesn't have sympathy, empathy, compassion, all the ways we connect as humans. So I don't think it's going to replace jobs as much as what people think it is. I think what it's going to do, it's going to make our jobs more sophisticated, which means as employees, you're going to have to be more sophisticated. You've got to embrace it in order to stay relevant, if you will, right? So it's just an evolution, the same way the internet was. And, I remember back in the days when we used to use old typewriters before word processors became a thing. And so you had to evolve and change. And most of us have. So technologically, though, it's much more advanced than anything we've seen before. In fact, I just read an article that talks about how technology is going to evolve in the next 5, 6, 7 years faster than it's done in the previous 100.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I believe it.
yeah, I believe it. And the thing about it is, if you look 100 years ago, I think it's only 20-25% of homes had electricity and running water inside the house. And so if you look today, that's ridiculous to think that you don't have running water or electricity in your house, right? But 100 years ago, the most sophisticated technology you had was the Ford production line that was producing Model T Fords. And look at it today. We have phones that sent computers that were less powerful than our phones that sent the man to the moon. So yeah, I think you're going to see massive leaps in technology the next 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, it is really amazing even what you can do now. I mean,
Mhm.
I've got 4 different AI employees. I've got an AI agent that does my graphics for me, one
Mhm.
that does make sure and it analyzes it. Well, it's in charge of my brand. And
Yeah.
so it double checks anything that any of the other agents are doing, and it makes sure that everything on my website will convert. It gives me things that I've got to fix, right? Which I have a list,
Yeah.
but it also yeah, it keeps me aligned. It keeps me, even with any social media content that I create, it tells me what I need to be doing, how I
Yeah.
need to dress, all of it. And then I've got another one that helps me with all of my strategy and all that kind of stuff. And then his name is Bob. And Bob, when I programmed him, I didn't quite finish. And so Bob is like a consultant that never stops talking.
Oh dear.
And so Bob will start to talk to the one that's in charge of my brand, and they have had arguments.
Yeah, I
And
don't doubt it.
yeah, and say like, look, Bob doesn't understand the brand. Tell Bob to stop talking. So it's funny,
Yeah.
but as a small business owner, being able to do that, just to, I found that, yeah, my manual stuff is right now, you know, things aren't as manual for me, but it still takes mental capacity because I'm still final approving things. Now, I could set up another one to then do all the final approvals of everything, but I like to have an opinion in it,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So that's why I haven't done that. But one thing I notice is that it doesn't make you less tired. You're just using a different type of energy. You're using a lot more of your thinking and deeper thought than you are manual work, right?
Yeah, and I
So
think what it does, it informs decision making. It shouldn't be necessarily used to make decisions, but it helps gather the data and give you a much bigger or better picture and clarity around certain directions, certain things to do. And that's the beauty of AI. It's so fast and expansive that you can gather a ton of data in a very short space of time and make sense of it.
yeah, it's great. If you pull in the data and you give it what to do, like I don't know if I mentioned to you, I came up with a cure for 23 years of chronic illness doing that. But
I
I
think you
did,
did. Yeah, that's amazing.
yeah, did medical research, and I did the medical research inside AI. So it allowed me to grab all of the medical research around the world for my specific thing. And then that
Yeah.
allowed me to figure out, and there was no solution out there, but they had done enough research where I was able to map it together with what I was dealing with and figure it out myself. But I think that if you're doing research, it's phenomenal,
Yes, I
right?
agree. Absolutely.
So, one concept I love is your belief that leadership begins internally. Can you explain the iceberg model and why beliefs, values, and purpose ultimately determine how leaders show up?
Yeah, so if you picture an iceberg, you see above the water about 10%. So 90% of an iceberg is beneath the surface that you don't see. And if you ask the captain of the Titanic, I'm sure he would agree with that, right? So the part above the water is what everyone sees. So this is results you make, your behavior, decisions, basically how you show up at meetings, etc. But that's about 10% of who you are, right? So under the surface, what people don't see are your beliefs, your values, your sense of purpose, the stuff nobody sees directly. So here's what I've learned is that you can't fake the top for too long if the piece beneath the surface isn't in sync, isn't aligned, isn't works upon. So if a leader's behavior is polished, but what's underneath is fear, it's ego, or a story that they're not enough, whatever it is, right? It kind of leaks out, especially under pressure. It always leaks out. So real leadership development isn't about learning better techniques. It's about doing the harder work below the waterline, because that's what's actually driving everything people can see. And I actually recently got certified by a guy called John Mattone, who has a fantastic coaching approach, and he calls this the inner core. The inner core drives the outer core. And I think there's so much truth for that. And what's at the heart of it all is your core purpose. So if you don't know what your core purpose is, then you haven't kind of examined your value system, your beliefs, your driving force, if you will. And it'd be like getting dressed in the dark, and we know how that turns out.
Yeah.
So this is where, a lot of leaders struggle. They fake it until they don't make it, right?
Yeah.
And it's because they've never taken the time to drive inside themselves and really figure out, what is my core purpose? What, who do I serve? What's my passion? And so it goes on, right? And so this approach, I think it's evidence-based, and John's stuff is fabulous.
I really connected with that because in my own journey, because it taught me something similar. And I think even in relation to my own business, when I rebuilt my business and when I rebuilt my health, my business changed as a result because, I was in fight or flight for a really long time and I was not operating at the highest level that I could. Right. So, I couldn't show up 100%. And then every external breakthrough that I had, it happened first on the inside, right? And so as I kind of woke up to everything and realized, oh, this is who I am. This is what I want to be when I grow up, and just being more in touch. I mean, it's amazing how things like that can affect you. But in the past, I really struggled because I was doing these like doer type things, marketing. Like it turned it what I was really wanting to do and what I was always successful at was making people more money. And what I ended up doing was, will you post for me? Which wasn't that bad, but I get frustrated when it wasn't making people money.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want to just post, And then it was this big realization of I'm selling myself short. I'm not communicating who I am, and I'm not leading myself. And when I switched everything, changed my entire brand, communicated who I really was, and the value that I could bring, everything changed.
Yeah. Yes.
So with all that, do you think that that's true for like larger organizations, that culture can't outperform the inner development of its leaders? Do you think that they're limited in that regard?
Absolutely. I think that a company is limited by how much potential they unleash in their leaders and future leaders. Because if you're stagnant at the leadership level, then your company is stagnant by de facto, right? So the smart organizations, I think they're constantly tweaking. And what reminds me of is, if you've been to the opticians when they have those machines where they say, how's this lens? And they adjust it, right? And the way I view my role is like an organizational chiropractor, where we're making these slight adjustments for the health of the organization. It's not massive, big sweeping changes because we know they don't work. But if we make these small incremental changes over time, what happens? You see this nice increase in effectiveness, in productivity, employee retention. All those things are interconnected. And the heart of it is leadership. And by leadership, diving deep inside yourself. What's the core purpose? Does it align to the core purpose of the organization? Are we in sync as a leadership team? What are the skills that we're perhaps missing as a team or individually? Can we be vulnerable? A lot of companies, vulnerability is viewed as a weakness, not as a strength, which is an old 1970s mantra, I guess, handed down to them by military thinking, which is we're big, strong, and tough. And, that makes a great leader. And we both know that's not true.
Yeah.
And so how do you mix that all together with a diverse leadership group, with gender equality, with race equality, and all those other things that make up a culture? And so it is quite complex in all the moving pieces, but the heart of it is leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. So we also talked about emotional intelligence, and I think that that term is probably used a lot, and there's varying definitions of it, right?
Yep.
And people understand it at a different, varying levels. Why do you think it's becoming one of the most important leadership skills in the workplace, and how do you define it?
Yeah, so the old model no longer works. You can't command and control your way through a workforce that has options, works from anywhere, and will quietly disengage the moment they feel unseen. I think the leaders that get results now are those who can read a room, manage their reactions, make people feel understood and valued, right? So as AI takes over more of the technical work, emotional intelligence becomes the things that genuinely is yours, right? It's the one skill that grows more valuable as machines get smarter, not less. That's why I tell leaders not a soft skill, it's the core skill. And
Mhm.
emotional intelligence, unlike, your IQ is kind of fixed for the duration of your life. It'll shift a couple of percent maybe. But emotional intelligence you can develop exponentially. And the old expression, IQ will get you the job, but EQ will help you elevate in your role. And that's absolutely true because I don't think you can be a very effective leader without a high level of EQ, emotional intelligence. So, if we look at the cornerstone of emotional intelligence, it's self awareness. Well, what's self awareness? It's that deep inner core work where we examine our core purpose and we look at our values and beliefs and our thoughts and we make some sense of it. And I think that's the core to your question. How do I define it? I think it's looking at your inner core and understanding the direction you want to go in as a leader. Or it doesn't necessarily have to be a leader, it could be any walk of life. But
Mhm.
I think it's especially important for leaders in today's turbulent times. I think you're going to see massive changes the next 5 to 7 years in the workplace.
I like that definition. One thing that I learned along the way, because when I started my journey of kind of doing that myself,
Hmm.
gosh, 2018 ish, and I just started to look at things that I never really thought to look at, things like regulating emotions,
Yeah. Yeah.
things that you might not grow up with, right? And I think probably one of the biggest things that helped me with my relationships was when I started to look at my shortcomings with massive compassion
Yeah.
rather than judging myself. And what I discovered was when I finally did that for myself, I could do that for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing about it. It's very liberating when you can look inside yourself and be generous to yourself, but also realize, where did I fall short? And what I think one of the really important leadership skills is the ability to reflect on things and know where you would course correct if things didn't go as planned or as well as you'd like them to. So, if you could do a do over, what would you do differently to the way you handled that situation is the question, right?
Yeah.
And I think emotionally intelligent leaders can go back and say, well, I think, I got triggered in that meeting. And so I said a few things that, perhaps I wouldn't have said if I'd thought about it ahead of time. Okay, so moving forwards, what are you going to do differently? And so we build the skill set around that reflection because we don't want people to stop reflecting. We want them to keep self-correcting because if I'm not there as a coach or whoever's guiding you, then what are you going to do? It's, teach someone to fish for themselves and they'll feed
Hmm.
themselves for the rest of their lives, right? That mentality. So we're teaching them the skills along the way of how being emotionally intelligent is going to be a benefit to you and those around you because the last part of emotional intelligence is how your emotions affect others, right? It's your social interactions based on your emotions. It has an effect, whether that be your family, whether that be your friends, whether that be people in the workplace. It's all the same. You have an effect on someone.
Yeah.
So that's why I believe it's massively important.
Yeah, definitely. So, where do you think companies typically miss the mark when trying to build a healthy culture?
I think they treat culture like a project rather than a practice. And they roll out the values, they hold the offsite, print all the posters, and then they just go right back to rewarding the behavior that contradicts it all. The example I gave earlier of rewarding someone based on their employees' performance, not on the way they maybe promote them or develop them. And I don't think people are fooled by that. They watch what gets promoted and what gets punished. And that's the real culture. That's the underbelly. That what the poster, no matter what the poster says, the underbelly is what people will look at, where they will gravitate to and make their judgment. I think the other big miss is thinking that culture is HR's job. Culture is set by how leaders behave when things get hard, such as during a layoff, which I've been part of, and that is not something I enjoyed whatsoever. But it says a lot about the culture, the way they handle that. A missed number or a tough call. I think that's when people find out what you actually believe, the way you act, the way you show up. And I don't think you can outsource that to a department. It has to be at the leadership level. And so the true culture projects aren't really projects at all. They're a practice, and they're demonstrated and reinforced by key leadership. And I can't tell you how many culture projects I've been involved with where you want senior leaders to be involved and they go, I don't have time for that. It's stuff. That's foo-foo stuff. That's soft stuff. I'm not interested in that. Yeah. That's it. And that is the true culture right there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. And, I like what you said at the beginning of the podcast about how business growth is directly tied to the leaders, because that's something that I've seen in working with businesses and helping them grow, because I've had CEOs come to me and say, all right, well, we're going to add this, this new service on, we want to grow here, and we want to do all these things. So, I start working with them, but if they can't communicate or don't communicate with the team and communicate the vision, get people on board, build trust with those people, so everybody is trusting what the leader's doing, then everything stalls and it'll often implode because somebody moved my cheese. Or why are we doing that? That's my job, or whatever it may be. Yeah. And I cannot tell you how many conversations that I have had with leaders of, if you're going to make a big change in your organization, make them part of the decision process. If it's going to affect their job, do something where they have a say in it, right? Because there's so many decision levels and so many phases that there's really no excuse not to do that. And so I'm wondering, have you seen a lot of that yourself, where they've got this big strategy, this big thing they're going to implement, and then it just stops?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at there's a guru out there called John Kotter, who's like the grandfather of change management, Harvard business professor. And his studies led him to believe that 75% of large company initiatives fail. And the reality of it is because leadership, it chooses to get involved. I've seen it where leaders get involved when it looks like the project's going to really do well. And so they want their name on it. I've seen that. And then I've also seen them step away when it's pretty obvious it's not going to go well. So that's not leadership in either regard. Leaders stand at the front at the beginning of the project and say, we will make this successful, and I'm going to be involved regardless. Yeah. And then, people will follow that. And the people that step in at the last minute to take the glory, there's no respect for those folks. When the people have been doing the grunt work, the heavy lifting, they're not on a big bonus typically. And so it usually falls down to middle managers, the ones that are caught in this valley. And in my book, Mind the Gap, I talk about this middle management, the push-pull, because you've got this obligation to the people that report to you. And then you've got this pull from senior leaders wanting you to fulfill their strategy and everything. So you've got, it's like a whipsaw. They're being pulled and pushed all over the place, which is no wonder why one of the most challenging jobs right now is middle managers, because of that very thing. And, for a lot of people that I've spoken to, the little salary bump they get by being a middle manager just isn't worth it at the end of the day. They'd rather stay, highly technical and earn almost as much without all the headaches. And I get it. I mean, total validity to that. And typically what they're fighting uphill against is the culture. And so who owns the culture? Well, it's above their level, so they don't get a say in it. So it's a no-win situation for a lot of the time. That's why people leave, because there's no way out.
Yeah.
Well, there's one way out, and it's exiting the organization.
Yeah, it's amazing. So if you're advising a CEO today, what are the top 2 or 3 leadership capabilities they need to develop over the next 5 years?
Well, first, as we spoke about earlier, self-awareness, the cornerstone of emotional intelligence. For a lot of people, it sounds soft, but a leader who doesn't understand their own patterns and blind spots will unconsciously cap the entire organization at their level. The work below the surface has to come first. So you've got to do that inner core work. And most of them will say, well, I don't have time to do that. And that's their excuse always. Don't have time for that. It's soft stuff. And what happens is they unconsciously cap the organization at their level, whatever that is. Second, I think the ability to build trust quickly across distances, across generations. We've got 5 generations of people in the workforce today. And across differences, teams are more spread out, more diverse than ever. And trust is what actually makes them work. So if you can do that, build trust quickly, it's creating that psychological safety, that atmosphere where people aren't frightened to make mistakes, not frightened that if they make a mistake, it's going to be punished, as opposed to, hey, let's make it a coaching moment so that we all kind of can elevate together. And third, I think the comfort with uncertainty or ambiguity. I think that the next 5 years will keep shifting under everybody's feet. I think the CEOs who thrive won't be the ones with all the answers. They'll be the ones who can stay steady, keep their people grounded, and make sound decisions without complete information. So those 3 things would be the top 3 for me.
All right. So I have a question that I like to ask all of my podcast guests. You have been in this space for a very long time. What is your truth that has gotten you this far in your journey?
I think people rise to how you see them. So if you treat someone as capable, worth investing in, and worth believing in, they usually go into it. And if you treat them as a cost to be managed, they shrink to think that too. So you have a decision to make. And it goes back to what I was saying about AI is going to reveal the truth. Either we want to use AI to increase our people's capability, their effectiveness, or do we want to replace people with AI? It's a mindset, right? When you look at those 2 options. And it's going to come down to that for a lot of organizations at some juncture, I think. So I built my career on the first bet, the belief that when you genuinely put people first, everything else, including performance, loyalty, results, tend to follow. It's not always the fastest path, but it's one I'd stake my name on. And so far, it hasn't let me down.
I love that. Duncan, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your expertise.
You bet. Thank you, Amy. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. And if there are people that are listening that would love to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, you can reach me on my email, Duncan Brand at iCloud.com. You can go on my website, intrinsic-leader.com, and look forward to hearing from anyone who wants to just talk or needs some guidance, whatever. Always happy to chat.
I'll put your links down below. And if you are listening, you want more information about this podcast or upcoming shows, you can visit acalltothrive.com. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week.